The day the signal arrived, Earth had 14 minutes to respond before it disappeared forever. Cole Warren was not supposed to be he dressed differently for the occasion. He had not. He stood at the podium and looked out at the room and said the thing that had been sitting in his chest since the moment he decoded those first words. He said, "We did not ask to be in this, but we have never once backed down from a fight we were never supposed to win." The room was silent. Then every single person in it stood up. In the year 2077, humanity faced its greatest challenge, not from war, not from plague, but from a deafening silence. The stars, once filled with signals and whispers of distant galaxies, had gone quiet. To find out why, the Global Space Alliance initiated Project Echo, a mission not just of exploration, but of survival. The catch: the selection process was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It wasn't about the strongest, the smartest, or the most experienced astronauts. It was about something more abstract. Candidates from every walk of life were gathered. There were no interviews, no physical tests, no psychological evaluations. Instead, they were all led into a vast, empty chamber. In the center sat a single object, a smooth obsidian sphere that seemed to absorb the light around it. The instruction was simple: connect with it. Days turned into weeks. Thousands tried and failed. They touched it, shouted at it, analyzed it, and even prayed to it. Nothing. The sphere remained inert, a silent judge. The world watched, baffled and losing hope. Then, one by one, 6 individuals approached. First came Alara, a linguist who had dedicated her life to deciphering dead languages. She didn't touch the sphere. She sat before it and hummed an ancient forgotten lullaby. A soft, blue light pulsed from within the sphere, matching the rhythm of her song. She was the first. Next was Jian, a bioengineer who had lost his sight in a lab accident. He couldn't see the sphere, but he could feel its subtle vibrations. He placed his hands on the floor around it and began to tap, creating a complex rhythm, like a heartbeat. The sphere responded with a warm, steady glow. He was the second. Then came Anya, a former concert pianist whose hands were crippled by arthritis. She couldn't play anymore, but the music never left her. She stood before the sphere and simply imagined a symphony, her mind alive with a cascade of notes. The sphere's surface swirled with colors, painting her silent music and light. She was the third. The fourth was Marcus, a deep-sea welder who spent more time in the crushing dark of the abyss than on land. He was a man comfortable with total isolation. He approached the sphere, and instead of trying to get a reaction, he shielded it with his own body, sharing his silence with it. A deep, resonant hum emanated from the sphere, a sound of shared solitude. Fifth was Lena, a professional mourner from a culture that believed grief was a bridge between worlds. She sat and spoke softly to the sphere, not of hope or discovery, but of lost the silence of the stars, the fear of being alone. A single, shimmering tear-like drop of light slid down the sphere's surface. The final member was a child named Kale, an orphan who had never spoken a word. He walked up to the sphere, looked at his faint reflection on its dark surface, and smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. The sphere flared with a brilliant, blinding white light, illuminating the entire chamber, as if smiling back. The linguist who spoke with melody, the engineer who saw with vibration, the pianist who played with her mind, the welder who shared his silence, the mourner who connected through sorrow, and the child who offered pure joy. They weren't soldiers or scientists in the traditional sense. They were communicators, chosen not for what they could do, but for how they could feel. Their mission was to venture into the silent void aboard the starship Seraphim. They weren't sent to fight or conquer. They were sent to understand. To ask the universe a question it seemed only they could pose. Why have you gone quiet? As they left Earth, no one knew what they would find. Were they humanity's last hope, or a final, desperate message in a bottle, cast into a silent cosmic ocean? Their journey had just begun. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more explorations into the unknown. See you next time. The Grand Dominion Arena was not a stadium or a coliseum or anything that could be built on a planet. It was a planet. The construct, as the Galactic Council called it, was a manufactured world roughly the size of Mars, positioned in neutral space at the edge of a system with no sun of its own. It was ringed by a permanent observation fleet carrying representatives from every competing civilization. The terrain inside changed every cycle. The rules were delivered directly into the nervous system of each competitor through a biological implant administered upon arrival. Every team knew the objective when the doors opened. Nobody knew what they were walking into until they were already walking into it. The 6 humans boarded their assigned transport vessel, a galactic standard ship called the Meridian, and had 40 hours in transit to learn everything they could about what they were heading toward. What they found in the archive was not encouraging. The reigning champions of the arena were a species called the Veth. They stood 7 feet tall and were built from silicon-based biology that made them significantly denser and harder than anything carbon-based. They had 4 arms and moved with a kind of mechanical precision that came from something no human team had ever possessed. Their 7 members shared a hive tactical mind. They did not need to communicate during competition because they were never not communicating. Their strategy had not changed in 43 consecutive winning cycles because it had never needed to. They arrived at the central resource node first. They fortified it. They held it. Anyone who approached was removed. They had never lost a single team member in competition. They had never come close. Second in the standings were the Dravik. They were 8 feet tall and covered in natural armor plating that had taken their species 400 million years to develop. They had 3 hearts and 2 fully independent nervous systems. They could regrow a severed limb in approximately 6 hours. The archive noted their one consistent weakness in plain language. They were exceptional in the moment and poor across time. Brilliant tacticians, poor strategists. They could win any single engagement and had a history of losing the larger picture because of it. There were 14 other competing species. Some moved faster than any human being could track with the naked eye. Some had sensory ranges that made human perception look like trying to see through a wall. Some had been competing in the arena for longer than human civilization had existed. Nina read every file once and then set the archive aside. She looked at her team in the low light of the Meridian-S common area and said what she had been thinking since the moment she first reviewed the data back in Colorado. She said, nobody in that entire archive evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them before they could walk. Every species in those files developed in stable environments with predictable threats. They learned to dominate their world. We learned to survive. Hours and hours did not make it easy. Derek leaned forward. He said, so you are saying Earth was already a harder arena than the arena? Nina said, I am saying we have been in training for 4 billion years and nobody sent us an invitation until now. Calvin looked up from the atmospheric data he had been studying quietly in the corner. He said, I would also like to point out that not a single species in that archive appears to have ever developed spite as a formal survival mechanism, and I personally consider that our most underrated advantage. Leo laughed. Priya opened her notebook and started writing. When the Meridian docked at the Construct S arrival platform, the reception hall was enormous and cold and filled with competitors from 16 worlds. The Veth stood in a group near the far wall and did not move and did not speak to anyone. They looked at the humans the way a person might look at something small that had wandered into the wrong room. One of the Dravik delegates stood near a smaller species to its left and spoke in the galactic common tongue. The translation implant in Nina's ear rendered it without delay. The Dravik said, look at them, soft, bilateral, no armor, no claws, no redundancy. The Omeganal world sent children. Nina heard every word. She did not react. She noted the Dravik speaker's position in the room. She noted the slight forward lean in its posture under casual conditions. She noted the way it favored its left side when it shifted its weight. She filed all of it quietly in the back of her mind and kept walking toward the registration point. Calvin walked beside her and said nothing, but he was smiling in the particular way he smiled when he found something genuinely interesting. The Orith observer watched from the upper gallery as the human team crossed the floor of the reception hall. He had been watching humans for 14 months. He had filed over 300 reports. He had never once in any of them written that he was uncertain about his conclusions. He opened a new report and stared at the blank page for a long time. Then he wrote, "Something about them is different, and I do not yet have the correct words for what it is." He saved the report without sending it and kept watching. The doors opened at exactly 0 hour and the terrain hit them like a wall. The construct had generated a fractured highland wilderness. Jagged crystalline rock formations rose in every direction. The atmosphere was thin and cold. The central resource node sat 40 kilometers from each team's starting position. Every other team moved immediately. The Veth launched at full sprint. The Dravik were 30 seconds behind them. The humans did not move. Nina called the team into the shadow of a large crystal outcrop and held a planning session. Priya spoke first. 60% oxygen means we are working at the equivalent of high altitude. We pace ourselves or we lose ourselves. Derek said the Veth will reach the node first. Nina said, yes, so we let them have it for now. The node did not need to be taken at the start, it needed to be held at the end. For the first 6 hours they did not go near the node at all. Priya and Calvin moved through the terrain mapping every choke point. Leo found 3 separate water sources. Diana identified compounds to produce a basic stimulant. Derek built 3 forward observation posts. Around hour 14 a scout from a species called the Sulari found Leo at one of the water sources. Leo held out a water vessel and said, "There is enough for both of us right now. We can fight later if you still want to." The Sulari scout took the vessel and drank and left. 2 hours later, a Sulari elder arrived at the human camp with 4 additional members, proposing a provisional alliance. Nina shook the elder's hand and told them her plan. At hour 30, Diana was crouched near the eastern ridge when an arena maintenance drone rolled to a stop 3 meters away. She reached into her pack and held out a piece of her ration bar in its direction. The drone could not eat. She did it anyway. It followed her back to camp, and at hour 32, when a Dravik flanking unit moved through the eastern approach, the drone's proximity sensors triggered an alert 3 seconds before the attack. 3 seconds was enough. Nina redirected the entire team to the pre-mapped choke point. The Dravik flanking unit lost the engagement completely. Their commander stood at the edge of the choke point afterward and looked at Derek, who was calmly treating the wounds of 2 incapacitated Dravik members. The commander's implant said, "You are helping our injured." Derek said, "Yes." The commander said, "Why?" Nina answered, "Because we can, and because the arena ends, but the galaxy does not. We are not here to destroy anyone. We are here to win." In the observation fleet above, the Orith observer had stopped filing reports. He was simply watching now, unable to look away. By hour 41, the Veth still held the node and showed no sign of leaving it. They had been there for 20 hours. Their formation had not shifted once. Their hive mind kept them coordinated without a single spoken word between them. 7 species had already been eliminated from the competition through direct confrontations near the node perimeter. The Dravik had attempted a full assault at hour 19 and pulled back with 4 members incapacitated. Nothing that had come at the Veth had made any difference at all. Nina had known this moment was coming since hour 2. Every decision the team had made from the first minute of the cycle had been building toward it. The water sources, the alliance, the choke points, the maintenance drone that was still following Diana around like a lost dog and that Diana had quietly named Gerald. All of it had been preparation for the problem of the Veth and the node and the 6 hours of continuous hold time needed to win the cycle. She was not going to fight the Veth for the node, she was going to make them leave it on their own. Priya and Calvin had spent 18 hours working on the idea in the background of everything else. The crystalline rock formations covering the Construct-S highland terrain had natural resonance frequencies that Priya had mapped during the first terrain survey. She had noticed early that the entire node platform was built on a crystalline foundation. Silicon-based biology like the Veth was known to be sensitive to sustained vibrational frequencies in specific ranges, not in a way that caused injury, in a way that produced an effect somewhere between deep discomfort and slow maddening irritation. Like standing inside the body of an enormous bell that never stopped ringing. Priya had spent 18 hours calibrating a resonance array built entirely from local materials that would push exactly that frequency through the bedrock beneath the node. Calvin checked her calculations 4 times. He said, "This will not hurt them. It will just make the ground they are standing on feel deeply unpleasant for an extended period," Priya said. "Correct," Calvin said. "And it will also disrupt silicon-based hive mind synchronization at sustained exposure beyond 3 hours," Priya said. "Also correct," Nina said. "Then we turn it on and we wait." The array activated at hour 41. Nothing visible happened. There was no explosion and no dramatic moment that the observation fleet could point to. The Veth simply began to look different after a while. Their movements became slightly less coordinated. The precise mechanical unity of their formation developed small gaps. By hour 44, their hive communication was clearly degrading at the edges. By hour 45, their leader made a decision. The Veth pulled back 2 kilometers from the node in a controlled retreat that still looked more disciplined than most species managed at full strength. That humans walked in at a pace that was almost casual. The Sulari covered the outer perimeter without being asked. Derek took the northern approach, Leo took the south. Priya and Calvin held the center. Diana stood at the eastern edge with Gerald, the maintenance drone, sitting beside her, running its sensors across the terrain in a way that had started to look almost protective. Nina stood at the front of the node platform and watched the full landscape without blinking. 2 species attempted approaches in the final 2 hours. The Sulari redirected both without direct conflict using terrain positions the humans had mapped and shared with them 30 hours earlier. At hour 48, the cycle closed. The Galactic Council's announcement system activated across every channel in the observation fleet simultaneously. It read the results in 22 languages. The standard winner declaration took 4 seconds. The addendum that followed it had never been read aloud in 8,000 years of recorded arena history. It said, first position Earth designation formerly Omeganol. Reclassification to full sentient status pending immediate council review. Additional notation. The winning team recorded 0 competitor fatalities across the full cycle duration. This is the first 0 fatality victory in Grand Dominion arena history. The observation fleet went completely silent. In the gallery where the species representative sat, the Veth leader stood very still for a long time. Then it did something that no Veth had done in the presence of another species in recorded history. It turned toward the human section of the gallery and it lowered its head, not in defeat, in recognition. The Dravik commander who had stood at the edge of the choke point and watched Derek treat its injured soldiers was already on its feet. It did not lower its head. It pressed one fist against its chest in the Dravik gesture that its own culture reserved for moments of genuine respect between equals. The Orith observer sat alone in his monitoring station above the fleet and stared at his report screen for a long time. He had filed over 300 reports on the human species in 14 months. He had described them as soft and bilateral and pre-significant and not worth the travel fuel. He had questioned their selections and their methods and their decisions at every stage. He opened a final report now. He thought about everything he had watched. The woman who carried broken teammates off a burning ridge. The medic who treated enemies. The engineer who built tools from nothing. The young man who offered water to a stranger. The scientist who befriended a machine that could not respond. The old man who kept going back into the dark because he was curious what came next. He wrote the shortest report of his career. He wrote, I was wrong about them. I think we all were. The galaxy classified Earth as Omeganal because its species appeared weak by every standard measure we use. We were measuring the wrong things. He saved it and sent it to the full council without hesitation. Down on the construct, Nina Calloway stood on the node platform and looked up through the thin atmosphere at the observation fleet hanging. In the dark above her, she was tired in a way that went all the way through her bones. Her team was around her and they were all still standing and nobody was gone, and that was the only thing that had ever actually mattered to her from the very beginning. Leo was humming something old and quiet beside her. Derek had his eyes closed. Priya was already writing in her notebook. Calvin was looking up at the same fleet Nina was looking at with the expression he always wore when something new was waiting just ahead. Diana was feeding Gerald another piece of ration bar that he still could not eat. Back on Earth in a basement facility outside Henderson, Nevada, Cole Warren watched the broadcast end on his small monitor and sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother and said, Hey, remember how I told you my job was boring, so there is this thing I need to tell you about. Outside, the Nevada desert was quiet and dark and full of stars, and every single one of them was looking back now.